black and white film people out there. I'm starting a new series today. Usually I talk about electronics, but sometimes cameras. But I want to talk a little more about the revival in film photography that's going on. For me, I've seen this happen a few times. I started shooting black and white back when I was in my early teens, and it was all kind of an interesting thing. There was a series of events. A neighbor passed away, and this was an elderly guy who had all the toys of the time. I'm talking 1976 here. He had a big stereo, he had a muscle car. This is a guy in his 80s, and he had a full dark room, which I found kind of neat. It was always kind of a mystery. Where did he get all this stuff, And he'd have, I would help him with his shopping. He couldn't drive anymore. I would go on my bike and get him groceries and come in the house, and he'd show me his darkroom. He'd show me some pictures he had done. Some of them probably done like 30 years before. And he passed away suddenly, and a few weeks later, his entire darkroom outfit was out at the curb waiting for the garbage truck. And that's kind of how I got into it. I scooped it up and brought it home. And it was this beautiful Durst enlarger. And it was all 1930s stuff, 30s through 50s stuff, basically for 120 format, black and white. And I got books from the library. I didn't have an internet to look this stuff up. I had books from the library, and I just kind of figured this out. And I had to actually get a tank and the old Patterson that can load 120 and 35. Many rolls of film through this one. You have 2 rolls of 35. Very common tank. You can actually buy them on Amazon today. And doesn't take much to do this. But this is kind of the whole thing. I'm talking about the past just for a minute to give you a perspective. Let's talk about today. A lot of the stuff, for instance, here's Blaze and all. I just got some of this from Downtown Camera in Toronto. I'm going to give them a plug. They don't know about it. But it's one of the few places that you can actually get this stuff. And they'll ship it. This is Blaze and all, which is a version of Rodinal, the original Rodinal from the early 1900s. I love this developer. It's a one-shot developer. I started out with Edwall FG7. If anybody remembers that stuff, it was from the UK. Very similar formula. I use common household vinegar for stop bath. And then I've always used Ilford Rapid Fixer because you can keep it in the bottle. You can use it as a one-shot film fixer or as a reusable paper fixer. Now I know I'm kind of skipping over fast, but I'm just showing you some of the gear. In later videos we're going to go into more detail. Here's what I find neat about these days, okay? Let's call this the 2023 film revival. Here's a vintage Pentax that I just restored, Spotmatic, from the mid-70s. Still lots of these around, still lots of them working. Probably one of the most desirable cameras to start out with, a nice manual metered camera. Talked about those before. But there are also some new 35mm cameras if you have the bucks for it. But it almost doesn't matter. If you can find a 35mm camera that's automatic or one that's manual, just shoot some film in it. So there's still lots of this vintage gear left. Now let's talk about the film. Here's Ilford HP5 Plus, Delta 400. These are all black and white films. These are all films that I've shot for decades. The 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And Ilford is, in my opinion, the best black and white film. I've always liked it better than Kodak. Kodak was more expensive, although Tri-X-Pan is cool stuff. When Kodak went under, I was really upset because Tri-X-Pan was a favorite. This was a 400 ASA film. It's back now, but it's double the price of Ilford. And there's, of course, economy Ilford, which is called Kentmere. Now, here's a discovery I just made, and this is why I think we're in another golden era. I don't know how clearly you can see that. Arista Edu Ultra. The Educator's Choice black and white photographic film. This is the 100 ASA 135/24, and it was $6 and change from Downtown Camera, which is kind of cool. This is the economy film, and it's basically the old Agfa Fomopan, if anybody remembers shooting that stuff back in the 70s and 80s, made in Czechoslovakia, which is kind of interesting. I haven't used Fomopan for like 30 some years. I'm going to shoot a roll of this today in this camera and then post it on my Google Photos. I'll put in a link in the next video. Give that a try, but hey, if I don't like it, there's always lots of Ilford around. And then of course Kodak is back, and this is Kodak gold print film. It's a little more expensive than the black and white 36 exposure, but let me tell you a little something here that a lot of people don't know. Why is this included with my black and white stuff? Because you can shoot it in your camera, you can develop it with these chemicals, and you get black and white prints. There's a layer of black and white emulsion on here that will process with Blazinol and Ilford. And just amazing, I had a camera that had film in it, got it from the thrift store, and I processed it with the Blazinol and the Ilford, and there's several pictures on there. And this was a film that was over 20 years old, sitting in the camera, and I got usable images. Now, I'm going to talk a little more about the process in another video, but I'm just going to give you a little highlight on that. This is a process I started. So here's a print of one from 2 years ago that I shot in Stratford, Ontario, and my brother actually liked it so much, he said, "Can I frame that for you, give it to you as a present?" I'm like, well, okay. This is kind of my new process. Back when I started out, I had the full dark room, either in my parents' laundry room, in a rented house, and then in subsequent places. I actually had a full dark room with the trays and everything. I'm kind of doing a half dark room these days. So I use a vintage camera, I use film, and I process it in this tank. But the next step is using a scanner, and I scan it at 3200 dpi in a photo scanner with an actual photo, little photo tray in it that you clamp the negatives down in. And then this was printed at Walmart. So it's kind of like the first half is analog and the second half is digital. And that's where I'm at these days. I don't really want the full darkroom setup. And print, I might get back into it. Prints are very time consuming. The chemicals have to be fresh. The paper has to be fresh. And I can tell you, one day you'll have all fresh stuff. You'll print for 3 hours and you won't like one photo. Just something isn't working. Maybe it's the relative humidity in the room, whatever. Then another day, you got some chemicals ready to expire, you're in a hurry, whatever, and you're just getting one great print after another, and you're going, wait a minute, I use the same exposure time, I use the same chemicals, I use the same equipment. That's how it is when you print. And it can be cool. I might do it again. If I had the right room in our house here, I might do it again. But for now, this is kind of what I do. It's kind of like a half and half chemistry. So I'll get back to you when I've shot some pictures on film.